In the course materials for this chapter, you will find this email. So let's open this into the editor. And we're going to open the index. Right click here and I'm going to open the live server. And you can see that this is running. So in this example, we're going to simulate an application that will send emails. Of course, this is not going to send any email, but I'm going to show you, for example, how to load these spinners, how to send this form, how to validate these fields, how to reset the form. So there is a lot of learning in this project. It's going to be a project where we are going to practice a lot the DOM scripting. So if we take a look here on the project, you can see this project is built on a framework called Materialize, and this is the work code that we have. So if I scroll a little, you can see that we have this form, and this is the ID. Also the email, the subject, and the text area, these fields have an ID. Also you can see here we have the loaders, and we have the buttons, send btn and reset btn. So we're going to open JS, and I'm going to open the app.js. So here we're going to create the 3 sections, variables again, event listeners, and finally functions. This is a personal preference, of course. You can write this in the order that you feel comfortable. So let's create first the event listeners. Event listeners. Then we're going to create a function called event listeners. And we're going to call a function called app_init. So this is going to be the function that is going to be fired when this page loads for the first time. So we're going to add document dot add event listener, and we're going to call this one DOM content loaded like this. Then we're going to call this function app_init. So I'm going to copy this name, and we're going to create the function right here. It's going to be called function like this, app_init, and this is going to be the app initialization. Like this. So the idea here is that, for example, when this loads for the first time, this send button is going to be disabled. Then with some events, we're going to validate these fields. And once we have all the fields filled, this one is going to be enabled again. So here on the variables, I'm going to create a const. And we're going to call this one send btn. It's going to be equals to document dot get element by ID. And we're gonna select this send btn. This is the ID. So we're gonna pass single quotes and send btn. So now we have this send button. Right here we're gonna disable the send button on load, and it's going to be send btn dot disable equals to true. This is going to disable the button. So save this, and now you can see that the send button is disabled, and if you try to click, nothing is going to happen. So in the next video, let's see, for example, how you can validate these fields and also create a special validation for these 2 fields. So let's continue working in the next video. In this video, we're going to validate these 3 different fields. So we're going to open the code, and you can see that, for example, the subject, this one, the email, and also the message, all these contain an ID. So we're going to select this input ID. Here I'm going to add a comma, and we're going to call this one email. It's going to be equals to document get element by ID, and this field is called email. Then we're going to create the subject. It's going to be equals to document get element by ID, and this one also has subject as the ID. Subject. Finally, we're going to add the message. It's going to be equals to document get element by ID, and remember that you can also use query selector. In this case, we're going to select this message, and we're going to validate right here. We're going to add validate the form. We're gonna add some listeners, and we're gonna use right here email dot add event listener, and we're gonna use the blur event listener. In this case, this function is going to be called validate field. So this function is going to be the same. So we're gonna create 2 more copies. We're gonna call this one subject. The last one is going to be the message. So we need to create this function now. Scroll to the bottom, and I'm gonna show you why I decided to use blur for this case. So we're gonna add a comment, validate the fields, and the function is called validate field, and we're gonna add console.log from validate field. Something like this will work. So the idea here, I'm gonna open the console, and when you are in these fields, the idea is that you are going to write something, but if you leave this empty, then it's going to run the validate field. In this case, when the user tries to switch to another field, it's going to run this function. And that's a nice place where we can validate that this contains something. So that's why we're using blur in this example. We're gonna remove this. We're gonna create a variable called errors. So we're gonna be adding elements into this errors variable. Then we're gonna validate the length of the field. So we're gonna create a new function called validate length. And in this case, we're gonna pass this. Remember that we have these 7 listeners, and these 7 listeners are going to execute this function. So when you pass this, you are actually passing the fields that we have added. So if you add validates the length of the fields, we're actually passing the complete field. So we're going to write this function validate length, and this is going to take a field. We're passing this, but this is going to be these fields, email, subject, or message. So right here, we're going to have access to the length using if. We're going to use field that value, and then if you remember, we can access the length of any string just by adding the method .length. If the method .length is greater than 0, then we're going to add the following field, and we're going to apply an styling style. Border bottom color is going to be equals to green. So this means that the validation is successful. And then we're going to add a class. If you remember, we have these errors. So we're going to return a class, field.classList. And in this case, we're going to remove error just in case that we have any errors. And in the other hand, we're going to copy this. And this is going to be red. And we're going to add right here an error. So let's save this, and let's open, for example, this subject. Click inside, then click outside, and you can see that we have this red line. If you take a look here and you inspect the code, you will find that we have this class called error. So this part is being executed. The border bottom with the color red, and also is adding this class called error. If you come here and type something, then release the button, it's going to print the border in the bottom with green color, and it will remove also the class. So you can see the class is gone. So let's reload this, and let's add something here directly. Then release the input, and you can see that it prints the border with green color, but it didn't remove the class because the class doesn't exist. So this code doesn't hurt if there is no error class, but it's going to be really helpful, especially, for example, if I reload again, click here and then click outside to remove this class if the class is there. So it's going to be really helpful. and that's why I'm using this code. So right after this, right after we validate the length, we're gonna validate the email. If you take a look here, for example, if we send to the console.log this and save this, I'm gonna open the to field, click here and then click outside. You can see that we have input ID, email, and the type is an email. So we can use this type and check. I'm gonna remove this. If this dot type is equals to an email, then I want to run a special validation, which is going to be validate email. And we're gonna pass the wall input. So this way, for example, the other two fields, the subject is a type text and the other one is a text area. This one are not equals to the type email. But the other one, this one, is type email, and we're going to check in this field if there is an @ sign, at least one @ sign. Validate email, checks for @ in the value, something like this function, and we're gonna validate the email, and this is going to take also a field, and then we're gonna add the next. We're gonna add email text is going to be equals to field dot value, so we can access the value that has written here, and then we're gonna check if the email text contains the @ sign. So we're gonna add if email text, and if you remember, we have a method called indexOf. When indexOf doesn't find anything, it's going to return a -1. So in this case, we're checking if this text contains this @ sign. So then probably it's going to be an email. So we're gonna check if indexOf, and we're checking the @ sign, is not equal to -1. That means that we have passed the validation. So it's going to be a code really similar to this. So we're gonna copy and paste this code. But remember, this validate email function is going to run only when the type of email is equals to email. So reload this, and I'm gonna add the cursor right here in the to, release, and you can see that we have the validation error. If you add something like hello, then it's going to trigger the validation error for the validate email. You need to have at least this @ sign. So you can add something like hello at hello.com, and then click outside. And now you can see the border of the input now is in color green. So now you can see that our validation functions are working, and we also have this special validation function to validate the emails. So in the next video, we're gonna continue working with this. So let's continue building this project. Now we have added this validation, something really simple. So the next step is going to be, once we pass this validation, we're going to enable this send button. So right after this, I'm going to add a comment, and we're gonna check that the inputs are not empty. So we're gonna create an if statement. We're gonna add if, and here I'm going to add email that value, and if the email that value is not equals to an empty string, and we're gonna add an end. We're gonna add also subject that value is not equals to an empty string also, and finally the last one is going to be message, and we're gonna add value not equal to an empty string. So in case that they are not empty strings, we want to enable the button. But also, if you remember, here on the bottom, we have added this error class. So for example, here on the let errors, we can give to this variable a value. So both validations that we have, validate length and validate email, are going to return an error in case that it doesn't pass the validation. So we're gonna add right here, both, first the comment, both will return errors. Then check if there are any errors. So here we're gonna add errors equals to document, query selector, all, and we're gonna make a query if we have a class with the error. So we're going to check if there are any classes with the name error. If I copy and paste this, you can see that we have 3. In case that we pass this validation, something like email@email.com, and then we add a valid subject and a valid message, we can send again the query selector, and you can see the node list now is empty. So we're going to add another if statement right here. If errors that length is equals to 0, that means that we don't have any errors. So the button should be enabled. So we're gonna send btn that disable, and we're gonna add false. So save this. And for example, let's fail the validations. You can see we have this in red, and the send button is disabled. So let's add something like hello at hello.com. We're gonna pass this one, but you can see this one is in green, but the button is disabled. We're gonna add something like hello. We also pass this validation, but this is also in disabled. We're gonna add something like hello, pass this validation, and once we pass this validation, we're gonna check that none of these fields is empty, and also we're gonna check that there are no errors. Then this is going to enable the send button, and you can see that we have the send button enabled. So this is how you can validate fields. And we're gonna add, for example, the functionality to reset the form. So here on the top, I'm gonna add a comma. We're gonna reset btn is going to be equals to get element by id, and we're gonna select the reset button. It's going to be this one. So inside the quotes, we're gonna reset button, and then I'm gonna copy this right here. I'm gonna add a comment that says send email and reset button. So we're gonna add the reset button, add an event listener. This is going to be a click event listener, and then we're gonna call this function reset form. So we need to create this form and this function. So we're gonna scroll a little, maybe right here. We're gonna create this reset the form, and we're gonna add function, and we're gonna pass this reset form, and I'm gonna add the variable for this form is called, and I think we haven't created this yet. So we're gonna create the last variable. This is going to be the last one. It's going to be send email form. It's going to be equals to get element by ID, and we're going to pass the form ID, which is this one, email form. So pass this right here, and then we're gonna copy this, scroll to the bottom, and right here when we have this reset form, we're gonna add send email form dot, we're gonna add a method in JavaScript that will reset this form. Is called reset. So save this. Let's make the test. We're gonna add something here, hello at hello.com, something like this, and let's subject, a new subject. Let's say that we're writing something, but then we click here on reset, and you can see that this is going to clear all the contents in the form. So the validation fields are working, also the email field. Also we have enabled this, and the reset button is working. So the next step is going to be, once we click here on the send button, we are going to simulate that this mail is being sent. So let's continue working in the next video. So let's continue building this project. The last step is going to be to create the event listener. when we submit the form and show these GIFs that we have here. So we're gonna select this send email form, and we're gonna create an event listener, add event listener. In this case, it's going to be submit, and we're gonna create a function called send email. So we're gonna copy this. I'm gonna add this right here. Function send email, and since this is a submit, we're going to pass the event, and also we're gonna prevent the default. Prevent default, like this. So we're gonna write the function that is going to send the emails. So first you can see that here I have these icons, these GIFs. I'm gonna open CSS custom, and I'm gonna comment this line. So the idea here is that these are going to be hidden, and once we click this, those icons or those GIFs are going to be printed, or are going to be in the screen. So we're gonna add first the spinner. So when this form is submitted, we're going to show the spinner. We're gonna call this one, I'm gonna add a variable const spinner. And if you take a look here on the index.html, here on the loaders, we have an ID called send, and also other one called spinner. So we're gonna add const spinner equals to document query selector, and I'm gonna pass this spinner. Then you can see here on the CSS, I added display none. So we're gonna change, once the form is submitted, we're gonna change this to spinner dot style that display is going to be block. So save this, and let's add an email right here, a subject, and something else. We're gonna click here on send, and as you can see we have this spinner, and this is going to give like the impression that this is doing actually something, but of course it doesn't do anything. So you can see that the spinner is there, and it's going to be forever like this. So we're gonna use some JavaScript to hide this spinner after 5 seconds or 3 seconds, and then we're gonna show the other GIF. So we're gonna hide spinner, then show the send email image, like this. So there is a function that you can use that is going to delay the execution. This function is going to be called, this function is called set timeout. And you run a function, then you open the curly braces. And right here between the parentheses and the closing curly brace, you add a comma. And in milliseconds, you pass the amount of time that this function that we have here is going to hold before it's being executed. So we're gonna add 3 seconds. 3000 is equal to 3 seconds. So after 3 seconds, we're going to hide the spinner, like this. And since this variable is right here, const spinner, we're gonna add spinner that style that display equals none. So after 3 seconds, this spinner is going to be hidden. So we're gonna add again the test. Hello, a message. And we're gonna click here on send. You can see we have the spinner. Let's wait 3 seconds, and you can see that the spinner is gone. So we're gonna show the other image because we have another one that is called GIF, is this one. So right after the spinner is hidden, we're gonna show this one. So right here I'm going to create this, show the image, and we're gonna add, for example, const send email img. We're gonna add a document, and we're gonna create this element. We're gonna create the element, so this means that we are going to remove this from here. So remove this, and we're gonna create an image. So the idea here is that I'm showing you the 2 different ways that you can use this technique to hide or to show an image. So this is going to create the image tag. Then we're going to add this variable, send image img. Then we're going to add the source. The source is going to be equals to img, then mail.gif. And we're going to add also send email img dot style dot display equals block. And this is because here in the CSS you can see that this image is all the images, both images, are using display none. So we need to add display block. The idea is to show this image after the spinner is hidden. So we're gonna add show the image right here. We're gonna document query selector, and we're looking for the ID that is called loaders. This one, loaders. So we're gonna use the ID loaders, and then we're gonna use append child, and we're gonna pass this send email image. So the idea here is that this is going to run once we submit the form. It's going to create these images, and it's gonna change the spinner from none to block. After 3 seconds, the spinner is going to be hidden, and the other image is going to be showing. So let's add something like this, hello. And we're gonna add something else, a message here, a message. And then we're gonna click here on send. You can see we have the spinner, 3 seconds, and then we have the other GIF. And again, this is going to be forever like this. We can add another set timeout right after. We can add something like after 5 seconds, hide the image, and reset the form. So we can add something like this, set timeout again. So set timeout is going to be equals to a function, and it's going to be after 5 seconds. So we're going to add 5,000 here. And we're going to copy this send email form. We're going to copy this. This is the variable that is holding this complete form. And we're going to add a method called reset. Same method that we added in this reset form function. So this is going to clear all the values. And also this image that we have added, this send email image, we're going to add dot remove. So this is going to remove the image from the DOM. So let's save this, and here on the 2 we're going to add the email, a message, something here. And we're going to click here on send. We have the spinner, 3 seconds. Now we have the GIF, 5 seconds. It's going to be hidden, and the form is resetted. So this was another nice project. You can see that we introduce the usage of different functions. And the best way of learning for me has been building projects. And that's the approach that I'm taking in this course. So this is it for this chapter. In the next chapter, we're gonna continue building more amazing stuff. So let's review the project scope for the tier project. You can see we have this called simulate email sending app. So we're gonna open this, and we're gonna see the features. If any of the fields is empty, the user cannot send the email. We're gonna validate the form fields also. And when submitting the form, a spinner is going to be displayed. A second spinner must be displayed after the email is sent, and also is going to clear the form. And finally, a reset button should be added into this form. So let's review the project. So this is going to be the app that we're going to use to simulate that we're sending an email. So you can see by default this send button is disabled. In order to enable this, we need to fill this form. So for example, here we are going to add the email. And if you add something like email.com and you click in this other field, you can see that this is printed in red. And this is because you have to add the @ sign. So if you add email at email.com and then you click on this second input, you can see that the validation now is successful. So let's fill the subject. We're gonna add something like testing, And you can see that we have 2 validations completed, but the send button is disabled, so we need to add the message. So if you add something like hello, and then you click here, you can see the send button now is enabled. You can see that we have this reset button, so you can click here and this is going to clear the form, and also is going to disable this. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Finally, let's add everything, testing and hello. You can see we have send, so we're going to click here on send, and you can see we have this GIF, and then this message telling us that the email was delivered. And then this is going to reset the form. So again, this is going to be a complete project, and you are going to learn a lot, especially DOM scripting and form validation. So this is going to be the project.